Steve Whan.
Deputy President. Madam Deputy President, the Opposition will be supporting the Rural Fires Amendment Bill 2013. The bill is a result of work that has been done by the government with its independent hazard reduction audit panel. The audit panel has made a number of recommendations on potential enhancements to the legislation governing hazard reduction particularly, and many of these amendments are due to that. They continue, though, a process which has occurred over a fairly long period of time of giving the Rural Fire Service Commissioner particularly very strong powers to dictate where hazard reduction should occur in the state and on any tenure of land. So, contrary to a lot of public opinion, the Rural Fire Service Commissioner actually does have the power to direct that hazard reduction occur on all land tenures right across New South Wales. And what this legislation is doing in part is strengthening and clarifying that power in some areas, extending it slightly to make sure that, that it's clear that the Commissioner can carry out hazard reduction burns without consent if reasonable attempts have been made to contact an owner. This is a result of work that's been going from the government for a while. It's obviously timely, given that we've seen in the last few weeks a very early start to the fire season and some huge loss of property in the Blue Mountains from fires, and that is something obviously which makes these things coming on in late spring very timely. The bill extends the objective of the current Act and functions of the RFS to include protection of infrastructure, environmental, economic, cultural, agricultural and social assets from damage. It gives the RFS Commissioner the power to direct a Bushfire Management Committee to amend its plan if the Commissioner feels that plan is inadequate. It allows the Commissioner to carry out reduction burns without consent if reasonable attempts have been made to contact the owner. Defines bushfire reduction workers to include the fire trails and their maintenance and establishment. Allows the RFS to draw water from any source for free for training purposes. Allows the RFS to destroy property that is dangerous. Extends a hazard reduction certificate from 12 months to 3 years for certain types of hazard reduction. I'll come back to that in a moment. Provides that a single hazard reduction certificate can be issued across adjoining properties rather than separate certificates for each parcel of land. Makes new offences for dangerous littering, including $660 fines for discarding of incandescent material in areas where a fire ban is in place. Amends the relevant Act to insert an aggravated provision for the offence of impersonating a firefighter. Now, as I said, many of these are a result of the Independent Hazard Reduction Audit Panel's work. I note that in the second reading speech, Mr Provost, on behalf of the Minister in the other place, said, and I quote, "Overall, the panel found that hazard reduction program is strategic and well administered." He said that the recommendations in the panel's final report identify a number of areas where the hazard reduction program could be enhanced. I think it's quite important to highlight the fact that the panel found that the hazard reduction project is strategic and well administered, because we do see, and the Minister has made a number of answers in this place to questions without notice, regarding criticism that we do hear from time to time about hazard reduction programs, the way that it's planned. And often it's clear that those comments that are made in the community result from misapprehensions about or misconceptions, about the way that hazard reduction is conducted, who actually has control over hazard reduction, and the ability of landholders and the Parks Service in particular to block hazard reduction. We too often hear accusations that hazard reduction is being held up by excessive green tape. We often hear that the Rural Fire Service can't insist on hazard reduction being undertaken. And we should be very clear about that, because the Rural Fire Service Commissioner does have the power to direct that hazard reduction be undertaken, and he does have that power over national parks, over Crown reserves, over council land and over private property. So there is a significant power there which was introduced by the last Labor government with the agreement of the then opposition, now government. And that is something that is very important. The other very important change that was made during the term of the last government was that the Rural Fire Service was essentially restructured. under the last government, and the commission and the service in its current form was created. But one of the key parts of that was that the Rural Fire Service Commissioner is the person who has overall control of bushfire incidents. There is no dispute about the chain of command. There is a single chain of command, and that actually is quite different at times to the situation that existed in Victoria before the awful Victorian bushfires of 2009. In those cases, we heard a lot of comment about the chain of command not being clear. New South Wales doesn't have that problem because we did that work some time ago. And I think that's important to acknowledge the panel's finding that the hazard reduction program is strategic and well administered. And I would agree with many of the answers that I've heard the Minister make in this place since we've seen the fire season start this year over hazard reduction and some of the misconceptions that are out there in the community about who actually runs it. So it is welcome, though, that whenever you do identify areas where it needs to be strengthened, that as was the past under the last government, that we get bipartisan support for those things to actually strengthen those provisions. One further comment on hazard reduction is that we do hear often talk about the amount of area, the hectares that are being burnt. And as I've said consistently over a number of years, it is not a measure of the number of hectares that you burn, nor is it an appropriate measure to talk about percentages, as I think was one recommendation from the Victorian Royal Commission, which I'm pleased that New South Wales never took on board. Percentages and indeed measures of hectares burnt has absolutely no relationship to the effectiveness of hazard reduction, because hazard reduction needs to be targeted into the areas where it best protects assets. If you gave the Rural Fire Service or the national parks, even for that matter, a target that in each year they must clear a percentage or X number of hectares, then they could very easily drop incendiaries from helicopters or from planes in unpopulated areas and easily make the targets of hazard reduction burning. But that wouldn't be anywhere near as effective as spending quite a bit more money, quite a bit more manpower, and actually clearing close to assets, something which is a lot harder to do, it's a lot more intensive, but it's something which is far more effective and much more important. So that's why it's very important that when we look at hazard reduction, we do it on the basis of looking at where we're doing hazard reduction. The Rural Fire Service measures in terms of the numbers of properties which it's protecting, the value of those properties that it's protecting through its hazard reduction activities and implementation of asset protection zones around communities. And for those people who, like me, live in one of those asset protection zones, would know also that many local councils have actually put a lot of effort in the last few years into maintaining buffer zones between those houses that are on the urban fringe and actually back onto bushland. And that work is, as I said, intensive. You don't rack up a lot of hectares. You can't say, well, we've burnt 1,000 hectares of hazard reduction, but what you can say is that we've asset protected X number of properties, and that's the most important thing. So we've seen some really important work done over the last few years, and this legislation is building on that work. We saw after the Victorian bushfires, very unusually, New South Wales actually doing a response to the Victorian Bushfires Royal Commission, a point-by-point response to that Royal Commission. I'd say that it's probably quite unusual to see a Royal Commission conducted in one state where another government responds to that in another state in that same way. And out of that we got the hazard reduction, the paid hazard reduction teams, who actually go out and assist with sometimes with householders doing clearing around their areas, with hazard reduction work in particular targeted zones that's consistent with the management plans for those areas. Now, that's something which has not always enjoyed great support. The Rural Firefighters Association, for instance, is a fairly constant critic of that program, but I commend the fact that the Minister has kept that program going, because I do think it does some really good work, and when you talk to the people who are involved in it, they actually really appreciate the opportunity to get paid doing something that they find very rewarding, and it's been and do an excellent job, as the Minister says. So I think that's been a terrific part of this program as well. As I said, this legislation is responding to 18 recommendations out of the panel's review, that the Independent Hazard Reduction Audit Panel, and it is doing some things which look quite important. The first two recommendations were to extend the Rural Fire Service's role protecting infrastructure. So it was a change to protecting infrastructure. It was a change in definition. Now, I guess we'd all say that, well, the Rural Fire Service has always tried to do that, but it is important in these acts to make sure that the definitions are, as best we can be, accurate to the work that we want the organisations to do, and obviously that has implications for when they do their strategic planning and so on, so that's a positive thing. And that's being changed in Section 3C of the Rural Fires Act and Section 9(4)(b) of the Act to set out the functions which broaden the definition of the things which they need to look at. The third recommendation of the panel was to give the Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service the power to quality assure bushfire risk management plans by allowing the Commissioner to direct a bushfire management committee to amend its plan if it's inadequate. Now, the Minister has spoken about this in question time in recent weeks, where he's talked about the fact that bushfire management plans involve local councils, local rural fire service, indeed the agencies who own land in the area, so the national parks, if that's appropriate in an area. And those plans are driven from the ground up. But as the Minister is addressing there, and as I experienced when I was the Minister, you do often get criticism of these plans. Often it's not particularly informed criticism. And I know that in doing this job, the Commissioner will know very much the difference between ill-informed criticism and criticism of a fire plan which is valid. And I suspect that this will be used sparingly, this power, but it's good to have it there. The fourth recommendation proposed that the Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service be able to carry out hazard reduction on a land without the consent of the owner after reasonable attempts to contact the owner have failed. As I understand this, this essentially is making plainer a power which theoretically the Commissioner already had. But to the extent that makes that clearer, that's a positive thing. The recommendation 6 and 7 were amendments to the way that public authorities report on hazard reduction works to the Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service in order to facilitate greater transparency and accountability. Again, an important thing. Members may be aware that New South Wales National Park, since they received a fairly strong boost in funding after the Victorian Bushfires Royal Commission, have in the last few years been undertaking a lot more hazard reduction than they had in some years previous to that. And we would all hope that they'll continue that higher level of hazard reduction activity. But it's important that in getting the whole picture together that they do report that well to the Rural Fire Service. But there's other areas which are also really important. Local government is responsible for a large amount of hazard reduction and particularly asset protection work, and it's a very positive thing for them to report. But also Crown lands. Crown lands often seem to have no parent when it comes to doing the hazard reduction work because the government simply doesn't have the resources to undertake the work on a lot of Crown lands. That includes also things like railway verges and all those sort of areas which are sometimes a little bit hard to drill down into working out the responsibilities for.
I apologise for interrupting. I would just like to acknowledge the teacher and students from Randwick Girls High who were joining us in the Legislative Council today. We hope you had a good time.
It is. I'm sure that the Rural Fire Service is very relevant for Randwick Girls High.
We'll send you the tape.
Yeah. The recommendation 8 was proposing that hazard reduction certificates for annual low-impact works may be issued for a period of 3 years rather than 1. That seems a very sensible change, Minister, and I commend you on that. It's because of the way that the seasons have been running, it's been getting increasingly difficult to find windows of opportunity to do hazard reduction in New South Wales. The season where you can safely do hazard reduction activities is sometimes quite short, given that we have been having dry periods and hot periods coming on a lot quicker, or conversely wet periods in the ideal time of year. which have prevented good hazard reduction activity. So to allow to reduce the red tape by allowing that hazard reduction certificate to carry over seems a very sensible thing. There's not much more that I want to mention in this. I note the proposals for consequential changes to the National Parks and Wildlife Act. They seem quite sensible, assuming, of course, that hazard reduction work is being undertaken in accordance with the hazard reduction plan for the area, which would have involved work with the national parks in the first place. So that should counter any concerns that people might have that there would just be people going in and lighting a hazard reduction burn in a national park. That's not going to happen. It's going to have to be conducted in accordance with the plan, and I'm sure the Minister would correct me if I'm wrong in that case. But the other thing which I just wanted to highlight is the increase to, or the changes to the offence of littering, which will target people who deposit lit cigarettes, matches or other material on land, creating an increased risk of fire in a high fire danger in a period of total fire ban. It really is incredibly frustrating for the fire services to know that some of these fires are started by people who are careless with cigarettes. It is, I'm sure that I actually have to say that you see less often these days people throwing cigarettes out car windows, and that's a good thing. It does seem to be something which the community opinion has stopped people from doing, but unfortunately you still do see it on occasions, and indeed I have seen it in recent years following a car on a country road, and that is something that almost makes you want to follow them and yell at them, but of course that would be road rage, and I would never do that. But I did have words to say to somebody in Kosciuszko National Park once who I saw chuck their cigarette, and fortunately he gave a very apologetic response rather than an aggressive response. This is an important thing to do. There is all too often fires which start from a very small area on the side of the road and fan out from there, which are very obviously cigarettes, and that's something which can so easily be avoided by people being aware of their responsibilities. So again, a welcome change to this legislation. I am pleased to be able to give the opposition support.